They hunted across galaxies until Earth became the predator. The Gret had a word for the moment a species realized it was being hunted. The word translated roughly as the last breath of understanding. Every species they had ever pursued had made that face at some point. The wide eyes, the stillness, the recognition that something larger had been watching them for a long time before they knew it. Commander Voss of the Gret fleet had seen that face on 41 worlds. He was looking forward to seeing it on the 42nd. His ship, the Kale, was parked at the edge of the solar system, hidden behind the gas giant with the ring structure that the locals apparently found beautiful enough to paint on their walls. Voss had reviewed the cultural data. They painted a lot of things on their walls. They also wrote words on flat surfaces and stored the words in buildings they called libraries, which suggested they were afraid of forgetting things, which suggested their memory was poor, which was another weakness to add to the list. The list was long. Sub-Commander Dreel stood beside him, reviewing the same data on a separate screen. Dreel was methodical and quiet and had been on 11 hunts. He was good at his job. He said, without looking up, "The dominant species has no unified government." Noted. They are currently engaged in 47 separate armed conflicts with each other. Also noted. They have not successfully left their own star system. Voss clasped his hands behind his back. What is the population estimate for the primary landmasses? 8 billion approximately, spread across every terrain type. They have adapted to desert, Arctic, jungle, deep ocean coast, high altitude. Some clusters live in places that kill most of their own biology. Voss turned to look at Dreel for the first time. They live in places that kill their own biology. Yes, voluntarily. There are large population centers in regions of extreme cold and extreme heat. They appear to have modified their behavior and their structures to survive in these places rather than leaving them. Voss turned back to the viewport. The blue-green planet hung in the distance, small and unremarkable. He watched it for a moment. Then he said, Class 3 rating. Dreel hesitated. The standard for Class 3 requires some evidence of interstellar awareness or organized planetary defense. They live in places that kill them because they chose to. That is either very stupid or very something else. Class 3. He moved away from the viewport. I want full scout deployment in 6 hours. Surface data only, no contact. I want to know their military distribution before we begin. The scouts went down 6 hours later, 7 small drones dropping into the atmosphere at angles that the humans' radar systems would read as atmospheric debris. Voss watched the feeds come in over the next 4 hours. Military installations on every continent. Weapons caches in locations that were geographically difficult mountain ranges, island chains, deep jungle, not centrally stored. Distributed, as though whoever designed the placement had assumed at some point the central locations might be lost and had planned around that assumption in advance. Voss noted this. He filed it as interesting but not alarming. Distributed storage was common in species with poor coordination. It did not mean the coordination existed. Then one of the drones was hit. Not destroyed. Hit. Something on the surface had detected it and fired a projectile that clipped the drone's rear sensor array and sent it spinning before the auto-stabilizer caught it. Voss watched the feed and replayed the moment 4 times. The drone had been flying at an altitude that should have been invisible to the humans' detection systems. According to the pre-mission survey data, they did not have sensors capable of reading objects at that altitude. They had apparently built some, since the survey data was collected. He pulled up the timestamp on the survey data. It was 14 months old. He sat with that for a moment. Dreel, he said. Commander, when did we last update the surface capability survey? Dreel checked. 14 months ago, standard interval. Pull everything from the last 14 months. Every broadcast they have sent into space, every satellite they have launched, every frequency we can intercept. It took 3 hours to compile. Voss reviewed it over the following 2 hours and said nothing to anyone. When he was done, he sat very still at his command station with his long fingers flat on the surface in front of him. In 14 months, the humans had launched 9 new orbital platforms, upgraded 3 existing ground-based detection arrays, and had been transmitting on 17 frequencies that the Gret used internally, not receiving exactly, but broadcasting on the same bands in patterns that could be attempts at decoding. They had been listening. They had been listening for 14 months, and the Gret had not noticed because the Gret had not been paying attention to a species that did not matter yet. Voss updated the rating to Class 5. He did not tell the Council immediately. He needed to think. He looked at the planet. It looked the same as before, small and blue and quiet. Something about the quiet bothered him now, in a way it had not an hour ago. The first thing the humans did when the Gret fleet revealed itself was nothing. Voss had expected panic transmissions. He had expected the species' fragmented governments to begin arguing with each other while the window for coordinated response closed. He had expected the 47 armed conflicts currently running across the surface to continue, because species in crisis defaulted to existing threat patterns, and these creatures had been fighting each other since before they discovered metal. For 11 minutes after the Kale decloaked in high orbit, nothing happened. Then every human military frequency went silent at exactly the same moment. Dreel noticed it first. He stood up from his station and said quietly, "Commander, they have stopped broadcasting. All frequencies. All monitored frequencies, simultaneously." Voss looked at the sensor array. The planet below was still turning, lights still visible on the night side, no visible mobilization from orbit, just silence across every channel they had been monitoring for 14 months. "They have gone to a frequency we cannot read," Voss said. "That would require them to have prepared an alternative communication system in advance." "Yes." Dreel said nothing more. He sat back down and stared at his screen. The scout teams landed 4 hours later, in 3 separate locations chosen for their distance from known military installations. Voss had selected rural areas deliberately, lower population, slower response time, easier extraction if something went wrong. The teams were 12 hunters each, experienced, equipped with the Gret's standard surface kit. Sub-Commander Dreel led the 3rd team personally. This was unusual. Voss had not asked him to. Dreel had volunteered, which was also unusual, and when Voss had asked why, Dreel had said he wanted to see the surface directly. Voss had let him go. The first team landed in a flat agricultural region on the largest landmass and found no humans within 4 kilometers. The settlement nearby was empty, food still on surfaces, vehicles in place, just no people. The team moved through the settlement for 20 minutes finding nothing. Then the team leader reported in and said the word that Voss did not want to hear. Pre-evacuated. The second team landed near a mountain range and found the same thing. A small cluster of buildings, empty, swept clean of anything that looked like it had tactical value. No weapons, no communication equipment, nothing left behind that a hunter could use. The third team, Dreel's team, landed in a jungle region and found people. The people found them first. Dreel's report came in fragmented because 2 of his communication relays had been taken out before he finished his first transmission. What Voss received was this: contact with humans, multiple positions, not running, 3 hunters down, and then the sound of something hitting the ground near the communicator, and then nothing for 40 seconds, and then Dreel's voice again, lower and faster, saying they are above us. Above, not behind, not ahead, above in the trees. The jungle team extracted with 7 of their original 12. 5 were gone. Not captured, not retreating, gone, in the way that things became gone when they were in a place that knew how to swallow them. Voss stood at the center of his command bridge and felt something he could not immediately name. He reviewed the data from all 3 landing zones and found the same pattern in each. No panicked civilians, no disorganized scatter. The population had moved in advance, cleared usable resources, and in at least one case had repositioned into a defensive arrangement that waited for the hunters to enter before it closed. They had not responded to the fleet revealing itself. They had been ready before the fleet revealed itself. He pulled up the 14 months of intercepted transmissions again and looked at them differently this time. Not as a species trying to decode alien signals. As a species that had decoded enough to know something was watching and had spent 14 months quietly arranging itself for what came next. He updated the rating to Class 7. He sent a message to the Council, short and factual, with the updated classification and the contact report attached. The Council's response came back in 2 hours. They said the rating was unprecedented and asked if he was certain. He sent back one line. He said they were waiting for us. Down on the surface, in a room that had no windows and no marking on any map that the Gret drones had ever photographed, a woman named Yunsa received the first confirmed report from the jungle team engagement and read it twice. She had a face that did not show what she was thinking until she chose to show it. Right now, she was choosing not to. She folded the report. She looked at the wall where a map covered every surface from floor to ceiling, covered in markings that her team had been adding for 14 months, one piece of information at a time. She said, to no one in particular, "They landed exactly where we thought they would." No one in the room was surprised. That was the point. Driel came back from the jungle with a limp and a specific look in his eyes that Voss had seen before, but never on Driel. He had seen it on Prey. Driel submitted his full report without speaking to anyone first, which was against protocol, and then he asked to speak with Voss alone, which was also against protocol, and Voss agreed to both things because Driel was careful and experienced, and if Driel was behaving outside of protocol, there was a reason for it. They stood in Voss's private observation room. Driel looked out at the planet. He said, "They let us land." Voss waited. The jungle site. I reviewed my own team's movement data on the way back. The humans had positions around our landing zone before we arrived. They could have hit us on the ground before we were fully assembled. They did not. They let us move in. They let us find the settlement. They let us spend 20 minutes searching it. He paused. They were watching us learn that there was nothing there. Voss said nothing. "Then they took 5 of mine in 11 minutes and let the rest of us leave," Driel said. "They could have taken all 12. The positioning was there. They chose not to." He turned from the viewport. "They wanted us to come back. To report what we found. To report what they wanted us to find." Voss thought about this. A species that was managing information. Not just defending, not just fleeing, managing what the hunter saw and what the hunter brought home. That required a theory of mind. It required the ability to think from the predator's perspective and work backward from what the predator needed to know. He had encountered that capability once before, in a species called the Veth on the far side of the second arm. The Veth had done something similar in the early stages of their contact, misdirected, obscured, fed false patterns. The Veth had been a Class 9, the hardest hunt the Gret had ever run. It had taken 4 decades and the loss of a full fleet before the Veth were brought down. The humans were not the Veth. They were physically weaker, shorter-lived, and had none of the Veth's natural camouflage or sensory advantages. But they were doing the same thing the Veth had done, and they were doing it within days of first contact, without any prior experience with a species like the Gret. Voss asked for the full surface analysis from the scout drones, all 14 months of it, reviewed this time not for what it showed about human capability, but for what it showed about human behavior under observation. He wanted to know if they had changed their patterns after the drones arrived. He wanted to know if they knew they were being watched before they started broadcasting on Gret frequencies. The analysis took his team 8 hours. The answer was yes. The humans had altered their communication patterns within 3 weeks of the first drone deployment. Not dramatically. Small changes, the kind that could look like organic drift to a system doing automated pattern analysis. But when you looked at the changes individually and mapped them against the drone positions, they formed something deliberate. The humans had identified the drone locations and then slowly moved sensitive communications away from areas where the drones had the best signal capture. For 14 months, they had been having the conversations they wanted the Gret to overhear in places where the drones could hear them, and the conversations they did not want overheard somewhere else. Voss sat with this information for a long time. Then he called Driel back and asked one question. He asked what the humans in the jungle had looked like when they attacked. Driel was quiet for a moment. He said they had not looked frightened. He said they had not looked angry. He said the ones he had seen directly, in the seconds before the team extracted, had looked focused in the way that something looks when it is doing a task it has prepared for and is moving through the steps. Voss nodded slowly. He thought about the 47 armed conflicts still running on the surface. He had assumed those were a weakness. A species that could not cooperate, could not unify, would fracture under external pressure. He was revising that assumption now. A species engaged in 47 simultaneous conflicts was not necessarily a species that could not fight. It might be a species that had so much fighting experience that it maintained 47 concurrent conflicts while simultaneously detecting a fleet at the edge of its solar system, setting up alternative communication infrastructure, pre-evacuating civilian populations, and running a 14-month counterintelligence operation. He updated the rating again. Class 9. He sent the new rating to the council with a message longer than any he had sent before. He listed every data point. He laid out the pattern. He ended the message with a line that he had never written in his career, that he had never expected to write. He recommended a halt to surface operations, pending full reassessment. The council responded in 1 hour. They said halt was not an option. They said to continue. Voss read the response. He looked at the planet. He thought about the jungle team, 5 gone in 11 minutes, and the humans who had let 7 walk out. He thought about why you let 7 walk out. You let 7 walk out because you wanted them to go home and tell someone what they had seen. He was starting to understand what they had been meant to see. He did not like the understanding. The council sent reinforcements. 2 additional fleet groups, 47 ships total, dropping from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, in a formation that Voss recognized as the closing pattern. The same arrangement the Gret had used to finish the Veth, to finish the Shari, to finish every species that had made it past the early stages of a hunt. He watched them arrive on his long-range display and felt something he had no name for, not pride, not relief, something quieter and less comfortable. He called the new fleet commanders to a joint briefing. He laid out everything he knew. He showed them the 14 months of counterintelligence. He showed them the jungle extraction numbers. He showed them the pre-evacuated settlements and the silence that had fallen across every monitored frequency the moment the Kale decloaked. Fleet Commander Asa, who had led the operation against the Shari, listened to all of it and then said, "They are a ground species. We control the orbit. We begin bombardment of identified military sites, and we do not stop." Voss said, "We do not have confirmed locations for their current military assets. The sites we identified are empty. Then we hit the population centers until they surrender. We tried that approach on the 3rd day. We hit 2 coastal cities. The populations had already moved inland. We destroyed buildings." He paused. "They sent us a message afterward." Asa looked at him. "What kind of message?" It was in our own language, translated from materials they had intercepted and decoded. He pulled it up. He had it memorized by now, but he pulled it up anyway so that Asa could read it directly. The message was short. It said, "You hit empty rooms. We are not in the rooms. We know where your fleet is. Do you know where we are?" The room was quiet. Then it got worse. The humans had attached a file to the message. The file contained the movement logs of every Gret ship in the system for the past 14 months. Complete logs, accurate to within a margin that suggested they had been tracking the fleet from the moment the first drone entered the atmosphere, possibly before. They had been watching the Watchers. Asa said after a long moment, "How?" Voss had been working on that question for 3 days. His technical team had an answer that he was still processing. The humans had apparently built a detection system using a network of small satellites, most of which had been launched before the Gret fleet arrived, positioned in an array that covered the outer system. The satellites used a detection method that the Gret shielding was not designed to counter. Because the Gret had invented their current shielding against Gret detection methods, and no one had thought to test it against a system built by a species that did not know how Gret shielding worked, and had therefore approached the problem from a completely different direction. They had found a hole in the shielding not because they were more advanced, because they were thinking from outside the assumption. While all of this was being discussed in the briefing room, something else was happening. Engineer Kale, named after the ship, a coincidence her parents had been pleased about, was the first to notice the alert. A small craft had launched from the surface, moving fast, heading for the orbital position of the primary communications relay ship in Asa's fleet. The craft was not broadcasting any signal. It was not on any trajectory that the fleet's automated defense systems recognized as threatening, because it was moving in a pattern that matched a piece of debris the system had already cataloged. It was not debris. It hit the relay ship's communications array with something that Kale's team spent 2 hours trying to classify and finally recorded as a precision kinetic strike using a delivery system that had been disguised as junk in the catalog debris field for an unknown period of time. The relay ship's long-range communication went down. The fleet could still talk to itself, but it could not reach home. Kale reported this to Voss. Voss reported it to Asa. Asa stood very still for a moment and then asked, for the second time in 1 hour, how. No one could answer immediately. When they worked it backward over the next several hours, they found that the piece of catalog debris had been in the debris field since before the Gret fleet arrived. The humans had put it there. They had put it there before they knew exactly where the relay ship would be, which meant they had calculated where a relay ship would logically be positioned given standard Gret fleet formation, and they had placed the device accordingly. They had set a trap before they knew the exact shape of what they were trapping. They had built the trap around the shape of the Gret's own logic. Driel stood in Voss's observation room again that evening, looking at the planet. He had not said much since coming back from the surface. He said something now. He said, "They are not reacting to us. We are reacting to them." Voss looked at the planet, still turning, still quiet on every monitored frequency. Somewhere down there, in rooms with no windows and no markings on any map, people were looking at their own screens and reading their own data and moving the next piece. He had been hunting for 30 years. For the first time, he checked behind him when he left the room. The ship started disappearing on the 9th day. Not destroyed, not damaged, not showing up on any scan as wreckage or debris. One Gret patrol vessel would be in a position on the long-range display, and then an hour later it would not be there. The first time it happened, Voss assumed a sensor error. The second time he sent a signal and got no response. The third time he sent 2 ships to investigate the last known position of the missing vessel, and one of those ships came back. The one that came back had a crew who could not explain what had happened to the other one. They had been side by side, and then they had not been. Voss grounded all patrol operations and pulled everything into a tighter formation. He did not tell the council about the disappearances in the same report as the communications relay damage. He told them separately, one day apart, because he wanted to see how they processed each piece before they had to process both together. The council's response to the relay damage had been to tell him to repair it and continue. Their response to the disappearing ships was silence for 6 hours, and then a request for his full tactical assessment. He sent it. He was honest. He wrote that he did not know where the ships were going, that the humans had demonstrated a capability he did not yet understand, and that until he understood it, he could not guarantee the safety of the fleet in its current position. He recommended withdrawal to a distance outside the inner system while they gathered more information. The council rejected the recommendation. They told him to identify and neutralize the source of the disappearances. He was trying. His technical team was going through every scan of every missing ship's last position, looking for anything that did not belong. They found something on the 4th disappeared vessel's location data, a frequency spike, brief and very specific, that happened 40 seconds before the vessel's signal vanished. They ran the frequency against their entire database of known phenomena and found no match. Dreel, who had become very quiet and very focused in the days since the surface mission, had an idea. He asked to see the human intercept data from before the fleet arrived, not the communication patterns, not the satellite array data, the energy output data. What were the humans doing with power generation in the months before the fleet came? The answer was that several sites had shown power output spikes that the automated analysis had flagged as industrial activity and filed without further review. Dreel pulled the locations of those sites and compared them to the positions where the ships had disappeared. 4 out of 5 matched within a workable radius. The humans had built something. They had been building it before the fleet arrived, which meant they had built it without knowing the exact position of the targets, which meant it was designed to work across a range, which was a significant engineering problem that someone had apparently solved in the time between detecting the drones and the fleet decloaking. Voss stared at this information. He called Asa. He laid it out. He said, "They built a weapons system using power infrastructure that we analyzed and categorized as industrial, and they did it in 14 months, and it is taking our ships." Asa asked what the weapon did exactly. Voss said he did not know. He said the ships were gone in a way that left no debris, which was either a very efficient weapon or something else entirely, and he was not prepared to assume efficient weapon when something else entirely was also possible. Asa asked what something else entirely meant. Voss said it might mean the ships were somewhere rather than destroyed, that a species clever enough to track the fleet before the fleet knew it was being tracked, clever enough to preposition a strike against a relay ship using standard Gret fleet logic, clever enough to run a 14-month counterintelligence operation while maintaining 47 separate armed conflicts, might also have found a way to do something with a ship other than destroy it. He did not know why they would do that instead of destroy. He thought about the jungle team. 5 gone, 7 returned. Why return 7? Because you want the 7 to tell someone what they saw. Because the information the 7 carry is more useful than the 7 not existing. Voss thought about what information a captured Gret ship carried: navigation data, communication encryption keys, fleet formation protocols, the full record of 30 years of hunts across 42 worlds, every species the Gret had ever encountered, every species they had eliminated. He thought about a species that had been listening to the Gret for 14 months before the fleet arrived. He thought about what that species would do with a ship full of 30 years of data about who else was out there and what had happened to them. He sent an emergency message to the council. He said, "Do not send more ships." He said, "They are not destroying the vessels." He said, "We need to talk about what comes next before what comes next is decided for us." The Council's response came back in 3 hours. More ships were already on the way. Voss read the message. He sat at his command station for a long time without moving. Through the viewport the planet was still turning, still blue and green, still lit up on the night side with the small lights of a civilization that had known something was coming long before it arrived, and had spent every available moment getting ready. He wondered, not for the first time, what ready meant to them. He was starting to think it meant something different than it meant to anyone else. The additional fleet arrived, and 3 days later the humans made contact. Not through a broadcast, not through a signal. A single small craft rose from the surface and docked with the Kale directly, without asking permission, using a docking code that should not have existed outside of Gret's secure channels. Voss had the craft surrounded the moment it attached. He had 12 armed hunters in the docking corridor before the seal finished cycling. The door opened, and a human woman walked out alone. She was shorter than everything in the corridor. She was carrying nothing. She looked at the 12 hunters and the weapons, and she did not change her expression at all. Her translation equipment rendered her words into Gret's speech a half-second after she spoke. She said, "I would like to speak with whoever is in charge. I have information about your missing ships." Voss met her in his observation room. Her name was Sita. She had a title that translated as Speaker for the Whole. Voss understood this to mean she represented a unified human government, except the humans had not had a unified government 2 weeks ago, which meant they had formed one recently, which he noted and would think about later. She said the missing ships were intact. The crews were alive and unharmed. She said this was deliberate. Harming a crew that had surrendered was not something her people were interested in doing. Voss asked why. She said, because the war is already over. Damaging the people who carry the news home only makes the next part harder. He asked what next part. She said the next part was this conversation, and the things that the surviving crews would eventually tell the Council when they went home, about what had happened here and how it had ended. She said those stories mattered. A story about a species that kept enemies safe and let them go was more useful than a story about destruction, if you were trying to establish something that would last. He asked what she was trying to establish. She said, a reason for you to not come back. Not a threat, a reason. She talked for a long time, sitting on the floor of his observation room with the planet turning behind her. She talked about every species the Gret had eliminated, and how she knew about them, and what the records in the captured ships had shown. The humans had spent 3 weeks going through 30 years of Gret navigational data, 41 worlds. She named each one. She said the humans were not interested in destroying the Gret. She said they were interested in the Gret not hunting anymore. She said there was a difference, and she hoped he understood it. Then she said, "You watched us for 14 months and decided we were weak because we were small and at war with each other. You thought the wars meant we could not cooperate." She paused. "We have been at war with each other for all of recorded history. We have been at war with almost everything that ever shared this world with us. We are very good at it, but we are also still here. And everything we were at war with is either working alongside us now or it is gone." She looked at him. "We would like you to be the kind that works with us." Dreel was standing in the doorway. He had come in quietly. He was listening with the expression of someone rearranging a large amount of information very fast. Voss thought about the jungle team, 7 returning from 12. He thought about 14 months of preparation. He thought about a weapon system designed before the fleet arrived using nothing but logic about Gret behavior. He thought about the missing ships, intact, crews unharmed, a planet that had had every opportunity to destroy and had chosen differently. He asked her what working with them looked like. She told him. The Council did not agree immediately. 4 months of negotiation followed, carried out by others. The terms were not everything the humans had asked for and not nothing. The additional fleet went home. The captured ships and crews were returned exactly as described, unharmed, everything intact except the navigation data. The Gret did not come back. Driel filed his report at the end. It was much longer than usual. The last line read, "This was the first time I encountered a species that decided, before we arrived, exactly what ending it wanted, and then built everything backward from that point." He submitted it and sat thinking about the word decided. On 41 other worlds, no species had ever gotten to decide. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about it in a way he had never had to think about anything in 30 years of hunting, which was from the inside, from the position of something that had almost not gotten to decide either. It was an uncomfortable thought. He kept it anyway. It seemed important to keep it.